Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure for me to be able to host this panel co-organized by the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and the International Institute of Space Law, together with my good friend Kai-Uwe Schroegel, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty. Before I make a brief introduction, I would like to say that we are really keen to get your questions. So someone will move around and you will be able to write down your questions, and then they will be so kind to bring the questions to me up here on stage. So we will have 10 minutes presentation for each panelist, and you will have then the possibility of really having an interaction, putting questions. So let me say that the Outer Space Treaty really serves as the foundation of international space law, and October 10th this year will mark the 50th anniversary since it came into force. And this is really an opportunity to reflect on the international cooperation that the treaty has facilitated, as well as the future of global governance of space activities. Regardless of the significant developments in space technology and applications, the Outer Space Treaty has long been contributing in areas such as ensuring the peaceful uses of outer space, providing freedom of exploration and utilization of space by states, and preventing harmful contamination of celestial bodies. The United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is the international body where the Outer Space Treaty and the other instruments under the legal regime of outer space were negotiated. For those past 50 years, the committee has continuously served as the only platform to foster global governance of outer space activities. At its 60th session in June this year, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space endorsed a draft declaration on the 50th anniversary of the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, which will now be tabled for adoption by the United Nations General Assembly. COPUOS took the step of endorsing the draft declaration in order to increase awareness about this fundamental instrument, placing the Outer Space Treaty in the context of scientific and technological advancements, the increasing role of space actors, and the consideration of the broader perspective of space security. The adoption of this declaration will be a very good opportunity to encourage all state actors to become parties to the treaty. I do believe that the universalization of the Outer Space Treaty is an important endeavor that has both symbolic and tangible impacts. By encouraging all states to become parties to the Outer Space Treaty, we will also build a stronger relationship between the treaty and COPUOS, as we know, the only intergovernmental platform at the global level for international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space. This panel discussion today will reflect not only on the universalization of the treaty, but also on global governance of outer space activities in the broader context, including discussions on space security, the long-term sustainability of outer space activities, and the importance of the frameworks for the safety of space operations, and let me say also in general on global governance of outer space activities. And this will be also a good opportunity to present a little bit more about Unispace Plus 50 and how Unispace Plus 50 can really contribute to the global governance of space activities. And in order to better introduce the panel discussion, let me elaborate a little bit through a very short PowerPoint presentation on the concept of Unispace plus 50 and what we want to achieve with that, before inviting my esteemed fellow panelists to share their views. So talking about Unispace plus 50 and also Unispace plus 50 and beyond, so what we intend to do from that moment onwards, let me say that this is the official logo of Unispace plus 50, and it's really marking an important, an important milestone. It's this year, by the way, we are also marking the 4th anniversary, the 60th anniversary of the launch of Sputnik on the 4th of October 1957. And so, in a way, the fact that we are having Unispace plus 50 so close to this event, and also the event of the 50th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty, is linking in a way all the main anniversary through a common path, and it's a very good link among all of them. We can say in a way that we feel, all of us in the space community, that we are today in a similar revolution moment. I mean, when the astronautical era started in 57, and then with all the other big events after the launch of Sputnik, something was happening, which was a real revolution. Now we are again probably in the second phase, in a new revolution situation, also due to the fact that we have so many new stakeholders. The number of members, I mean the members of COPOS is increasing a lot, which is linked to the fact that a lot of new developing and emerging countries are becoming more and more interested in space activities, are building up their own space agencies, and they are building up their own space industry. And we have an involvement really increasing in terms of NGOs and scientists and academia, and the civil society is really interested in being part of this quest. Now, really, if we look at Unispace plus 50 from this standpoint, can really be considered as an unprecedented opportunity to address challenges for space today, but also in a way in the next future. I'm used to say that Unispace plus 50 is plus 50 not only because it's looking at the past 50 years, not only therefore because it's celebrating the anniversary of the first United Nation Exploration and Peaceful Uses Conference, but also because it's in a way looking at the accomplishments, it's looking at the lesson learned and the best practices, and how we have been improving the situation, not only thanks to us, but for sure we did well our job in doing our capacity building activities, training courses, and we have been always trying to help member states and mainly developing countries in using space-based data and infrastructures for their own sustainable development. So the fact that now we have a completely different situation that we have to tackle is also linked to the past 50 years. So we have to look now at the upcoming 50 years. And so what we expect is to have a strategy document which is called Space 2030, will be the new UN vision in space, and will be based on 7 thematic priorities which have been decided by COPOS last year as the baseline for the preparation of Unispace plus 50. And there will be a dedicated General Assembly resolution which should be approved by all member states next year in Vienna in June, where we will have this special segment, so Unispace plus 50 being a special segment of the 61st session of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, as I said, open to all member states. These are the 7 thematic priorities. Probably if you've been following my presentations today and the last a couple of days, you are now familiar with them. As you can see, they are very broad, the different topics which are priorities for our member states and the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. This is the process. I'm not going into details, so don't worry. It's just to say that the process is quite complex, and the Space 2030 agenda will be based on these 4 pillars. You see the 4 red boxes. So space economy, society, accessibility, and diplomacy, because what we want to do is to explain not what we are doing. Yes, we will do that, but it's not the priority. How is also present in the Space 2030 document, but it's not the priority. What is the priority is to explain to member states why we want to do a lot in space activities, because space is really a very good tool across the board for fulfilling the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore support member states, in particular developing and emerging countries, in towards their own sustainable development. The 4 pillars I mentioned already: economy, society, accessibility, and diplomacy, and this depict very well the why we are doing what we want to do. And the main point, the overarching theme will be global space governance, or global governance of outer space activities. And this will be really one of the main topics that has been discussed during the preparation of Unispace Plus 50. And it will be really one of the main topics in the next coming months in the preparation of the event itself. And again, just to summarize, the meeting will take place, as I said, in Vienna, 20th and 21st of June 2018, as a special segment of COPWAS. We will have a couple of meetings, a couple of days where we will have outreach activities around the 4 pillars, plus some other topics, the 2 days prior the Unispace Plus 50 event itself, so the 18 and the 19 still in Vienna. We have a certain number of meetings and initiatives in preparation of Unispace Plus 50 that we are organizing, and a lot of workshops in preparation of that. And one important element is what we call the high-level forum, which is a platform to improve the dialogue among all the stakeholders, where the private sector, civil society, NGOs, academia, everyone can attend and discuss, and also provide inputs and comments and proposals for us, so that we can really prepare the best informed package for our member states to take the best possible decision in June 2018. If we go then back to the topic here of this GNF, so celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty, I would like also to link this to important thematic priorities that we're dealing with in preparation of Unispace Plus 50, and I would like in particular that you focus your attention on thematic priority number 2 and 3. Number 2 is the one dealing with the legal regime of outer space and global space governance, current and future perspective, and we have a working group for that. And the number 3 is enhanced information exchange on space objects and events, and we have, again, a working group here. And you see in this slide how these 2 thematic priorities are strongly linked to the 4 pillars: economy, society, accessibility, and diplomacy that I present before. So this is just to introduce a little bit Unispace Plus 50. I'm sure that at this stage you are really, really familiar with it. If not, you will have, you can find a lot of information on our website. And so without further ado, I would like now to move to the first panelist, Mr. Kai-Uwe Schrögl, the president of IISL. As I said, co-organizer with the Office for Outer Space Affairs of this important GNF, was going to talk about space security. Kai-Uwe.
Thank you very much, Simona, and thank you very much for associating the International Institute of Space Law, IISL, to this event organized by the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, which under the leadership of Simona is really a strong and powerful player and actor in the field of space activities to achieve an equitable development of outer space. And this is very, very important, and we all appreciate that. I was invited to talk about one specific topic. You have seen that for Unispace Plus 50, there are a few key topics outlined which are of particular relevance and interest, and one of it is peace. Peace is still, I have to say, common in outer space, but it's a situation which has to be nurtured very carefully and has to be maintained. So peaceful uses of outer space is indeed the topic of my short talk here. 50 years of Outer Space Treaty, this is really a reason to celebrate. The Outer Space Treaty is a treaty on principles. So you will find a number of principles outlined in the Outer Space Treaty. One of it is the peaceful uses, the peaceful purposes. Others are international cooperation, responsibility by states, non-appropriation, a very important and currently contested principle. And there are other very important principles which are laid out in the Outer Space Treaty and which have been further developed in other fora, like, for example, that space shall be used for the benefit of all countries. And these are the principles which guide and govern us from 1967 up to today, and in the view of the International Institute of Space Law, hopefully also in the future, because there are good principles. These are principles which have been done a lot of good things to the outer space activities, and they, if they govern outer space activities also in the future, will do additional benefit to all who are able to use outer space. Now, you see here on that map what the terms are which are prevalent and which you can find in the Outer Space Treaty. You will see also one element, and this is the element of peaceful purposes. Peaceful purposes is one of the guiding principles for outer space activities, that we all have to use outer space for peaceful purposes. Of course, we are not blind. We know that outer space is used in a dual use capability and capacity. But nevertheless, we have not had any military conflict in outer space. We did not have any aggression in outer space. All the space objects have been safe so far in outer space. And the issue is, how can we actually maintain that? Now, the question which arises today is how to maintain or how to keep track of the peaceful purposes. We have seen a lot of initiatives which are going into a direction of a treaty banning weapons, of treaties or arrangements which would limit military activities, but they have not been neither discussed nor even, of course, not been adopted in the respective fora. So we have to come up with something different. We have to come up with a different approach to reach and to maintain the peaceful purposes and the peaceful uses of outer space. And this is to focus the attention from trying to define what peaceful is or to define what a space weapon is or what military uses is. We have to make a change and look into the concept of how peaceful behavior can happen in outer space. We have to look at the behavior of actors in outer space, not the status of the actors and what they are doing. And this will be an issue which you will certainly hear of more and more often and more presently in the future, and this is space traffic management. The concept of space traffic management as a further development of space law and space regulations will play a big role in trying to find out and to then come up with solutions for getting into outer space, operating in outer space, and you see here the space environment, which is growing constantly and considerably, and to return to Earth in a safe manner where there are no problems, where there are no interference, neither physically nor radio frequency interferences. And this is the problem and the issue and the task of today, to define how can behavior in outer space be beneficial for reaching the notion and the state of peacefulness in outer space, for the benefit of a development which, as I said at the outset, is equitable, provides opportunities really for everybody, not only for the big, but also for the small and the latecomers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and inspiring speech. We have to deal with purpose, behavior. Interesting. Will be for sure a very interesting topic for, I'm sure, questions and discussions a little bit later on after the other two speakers. So it's really now my pleasure to invite here Dr. Peter Martinez. He is the chair of the working group on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities at Corpus. Please, Peter.
Thank you, Simona, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to participate in this panel this afternoon. So as we heard from our moderator, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Outer Space Treaty, which has set the legal context for space activities and the global governance of these activities for the past 50 years. And this anniversary is now an opportune time to look ahead to the next 50 years of the space age to see how the treaty can continue to underpin global space governance efforts. The contexts now and back in 1967 are vastly different. We've moved from a space arena that was dominated by two superpowers with Cold War rivalries to a space arena that is now truly global, diverse, and rapidly expanding. Our panel discussion on global space governance today is couched in terms of 3 S's, you could say: space safety, space security, and space sustainability. All 3 of these are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other 2. The Outer Space Treaty does indeed touch on these 3 S's. Article 3, for example, states that states should conduct space activities in accordance with international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, in the interest of maintaining international peace and security and promoting international cooperation. Article 6 refers to states bearing international responsibility for their space activities. And Article 9, for example, refers to states conducting their activities in outer space with due regard to the corresponding interests of all other states. Of course, at the time the Outer Space Treaty was drafted, the drafters could not imagine all the specific situations that could arise in the future. We're now faced with a rapidly evolving situation in the space arena, and indeed, safety and security on Earth are increasingly being underpinned by safety and security in outer space. This is a global issue, and irresponsible actions of a single actor can negate the collective efforts of many nations, and potentially in an instant. The focus of my remarks will be on the work we've been carrying out in Corpus to address these 3 S's through the Working Group on the Long-Term Sustainability of Outer Space Activities, which is working to produce consensus-based, voluntary, non-binding mechanisms which are being developed under the auspices of the Outer Space Treaty and the other treaties that form the international legal regime for space activities. But perhaps before I continue describing the work we're doing in this Working Group on Long-Term Sustainability, or LTS as we call it, I should perhaps pause to reflect on what we mean by long-term sustainability. I should say that this is an issue that we've actually struggled with in Corpus to reach a consensus-based understanding, but for the purposes of our discussion here today, I would like to offer the following working definition. We could say that the long-term sustainability of outer space activities is the ability to maintain the conduct of space activities indefinitely into the future in a manner that realizes the objectives of equitable access to the benefits of the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes to meet the needs of present generations while preserving the outer space environment for future generations. The UN COPOS Working Group on LTS is developing a compendium of voluntary non-binding guidelines for space sustainability. In June 2016, the working group agreed on the first 12 guidelines that will form part of this compendium, and it is currently discussing the remaining 18 draft guidelines. The guidelines address policy, regulatory, operational, safety, and technical issues and international cooperation issues pertaining to space activities. They're based on a substantial body of knowledge, as well as the experiences of states and international intergovernmental organizations in the conduct of space activities. As I said, the legal framework for this work is provided by the Outer Space Treaties and the other treaties that were ratified by many member states in the first decades of the space age. The guidelines are voluntary and non-binding, but this does not mean that they have no legal character, and I will come back to that in a moment. How will these guidelines contribute to the 3 S's? Some of the guidelines that have been already adopted and others that are under discussion directly address questions of space safety. Others address the security dimension. Some of the guidelines have characteristics similar to those of transparency and confidence building measures that were identified by the group of government experts on transparency and confidence building measures in outer space activities, while others provide a technical basis for the implementation of certain transparency and confidence building measures. One might legitimately ask, if the guidelines are voluntary and non-binding, are they not too fragile an instrument to address the urgent issue at hand? To this question, my answer would be that given the serious situation that we currently have in outer space and the rapid evolution of space activities, and also the evident lack of appetite among the member states and corpus to discuss new legally binding instruments, the guidelines present a pragmatic way forward to address this pressing issue. Here, I return to the question of the commitment of states to implement their obligations under the Outer Space Treaty and the other treaties they may have ratified. In practice, these commitments are given legal effect through national legislation and other national mechanisms. In other words, the Outer Space Treaty mainly has its teeth in national legislation, and this is why the LTS guidelines encourage the adoption of national legislation and also encourage ratification of the Outer Space Treaty and the other space treaties. We are entering a new era where there are lots of new space actors with many exciting new ideas, with potentially great benefits for humanity. But we need to bear in mind that the Earth's orbital environment and radio frequency spectrum are limited natural resources. The 3 S's are also in the best interests of industry, which is an emerging dominant player in the space arena. And I think that all major commercial space actors are quite aware of these issues. But I'm not so sure about many of the smaller emerging space actors. And I'm not sure that a number of them are taking these issues into consideration. For example, I worry when I hear statements that because small satellites are cheaper to develop and to replace in case of failure, a higher failure rate can be tolerated and is acceptable as a kind of business model. Failed satellites may disappear from an accountant's balance sheet, but they will not disappear from orbit, possibly for many years, and thus pose a threat to other space systems. One of the challenges I see is that the space sector is evolving so rapidly that the technical developments are outpacing regulatory developments. And this is especially concerning for emerging space nations that may have limited regulatory capacity. And I believe that one area where we could improve coordination is by getting national regulators to to liaise with each other and coordinate more than may be happening at the moment. I now turn to a few remarks on the dual uses of space. We all know that space is used for national security and military purposes. This is not a contradiction with the Outer Space Treaty. However, traditionally the military and civil space worlds have existed in parallel and mostly non-overlapping worlds. This dichotomy is mirrored in the United Nations system, where, for example, the peaceful uses of outer space falls under the 4th Committee, while the disarmament issues pertaining to outer space fall under the 1st Committee. Yet, in outer space, military and civilian users all share the same orbital regions. It doesn't make sense to have different sets of rules for military and civilian road users. Likewise, it doesn't make sense to have different sets of rules for the use of outer space by these two groups. Several years ago, I had the privilege to be one of the 15 international experts who served on the UN GGE for space TCBMs. We referred to this dichotomy in our report and suggested that there should be a closer coordination between the entities of the 1st and the 4th Committee working on outer space issues, and I'm pleased to see that the first interactions between bodies under these committees have started to happen. I also see an evolution within COPUOS on the discussion of dual-use issues. About 7 or 8 years ago, it would not have been possible to reach consensus on having a discussion on ADR and COPUOS. Today, the situation is different, and the subject is beginning to be discussed. I'm not saying that COPUOS is ready to reach consensus on these sensitive topics, but at least they are now being discussed in a very preliminary manner. Another way to promote information sharing is through, the 3 S's is through information sharing, and this pertains to the area of space traffic management and the sharing of SSA information. Nowadays, the most advanced SSA capabilities still lie in the hands of the military, but we're seeing the emergence of civilian SSA capabilities and also a growing tendency to share information, and I believe this is for the benefit of all. In closing, I just want to make 1 or 2 observations concerning the linkages of this work with Unispace Plus 50. The LTS guidelines are clearly relevant to the realization of the Unispace Plus 50 thematic priorities that address the legal regime for outer space activities. And I'm pleased to see that there's also a working group that is looking at the linkages between the guidelines for LTS and the articles in the Outer Space Treaty, and that this is an exercise being carried out under the legal subcommittee. In conclusion, Unispace Plus 50, because of its high profile, will be a very timely opportunity to promote wide awareness of the 3 S's and the need for collective and coordinated global action, and it will also be a golden opportunity to promote the universalization of the Outer Space Treaty. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. I believe that also this presentation from on long-term sustainability will really be very interesting for the discussion, and I would like to thank Peter Martinez for that. And now, last but not least, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Ambassador Peter Jankovic. He is currently the president of the International Academy of Astronautics, and among other things, has been ambassador in New York and also several years the chair of COPUOS. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simonetta. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a discussion about global governance of one of the most important scientific and technical activities in our times, and this whole conference has been dealing with matters of space activities. Simonetta Di Pipo has presented a marvelous outlay of Unispace Plus 50 to see to what extent this activity occupies an increasing amount of international interest. But seen against this background, it seems a little bit surprising that as today, There is an astonishing absence of this issue in any of the existing global political forums for international cooperation and crisis settlement, like the G7, shortly also the G8, today the G20, but also in many of the large regional organizations, particularly in Europe, where the European Union has discovered space only as late as the Lisbon Treaty, and where it is totally ignored by such large security organizations like the CSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which encompasses a vast security area reaching from Vancouver to Vladivostok, and would have any interest to show a greater interest in space. So thus, the absence of space and the higher reaches of global and European politics also explains why to this day, for instance, there is no space commissioner in the European Union, and why only a few nations in Europe have ministers of space. This is also more surprising as the United Nations had indeed seized the opportunity, the opening of the space age, to engage in space by creating the first universal space body, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, about which you have heard already many interesting things, giving it something like a political dimension by making it an organ of the General Assembly of the United Nations. So it was not conceived as a technical body, but as a highly political body working under the direct supervision of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The committee also had a most promising start as it rapidly embarked on creating the legal framework, the legal foundations for global space governance in the form of the Outer Space Treaty that we are celebrating these days, and a number of concurrent legal instruments. But it is perhaps no exaggeration to say that the international community has, at least until quite lately, not fully used these fundamentals to depart towards a real system of global space governance. If today there are more and more calls to envision such a system, this has a lot to do with growing and fully justified concerns about space security, many aspects of which have been mentioned by Peter Martinez, and the safe conduct of space operations. If answers are sought to these concerns, they are mostly approached on a national basis, the main spacefaring nations taking the lead, as these countries are most affected by explosive new developments in space. These concerns are fed from several sides, and next to the civilian technological side, there's also concern about possible military uses of space, and in particular the issue of placing weapons in orbit around the Earth, the issue of space militarization. While, based on publicly available information, there may still be no weapons currently stationed in space. Space is the home of many devices that serve national security interests, and Peter Martinez has addressed this issue in more detail. This is particularly the case of imaging and communication satellites operated by defense and security organizations of several governments, a space domain critical today to every military operation. It is around these most critical space infrastructures that concerns about their vulnerability from attack evolve, and that in the absence of any legal protection by treaties, or other forms of international rule or understandings, have led to the development of various forms of space deterrence, albeit of a purely national character. So thus, the United States Strategic Command, STRATCOM, has developed a series of programs of deterrence against anti-satellite capabilities of other nations, including war games, to explore what conflict would look like if it would extend into space one day. This is indeed a very threatening perspective. It is developments like these that show the essential need to proceed further on the way to a form of modernized space governance that responds to a myriad of new problems and concerns that have arisen within and around space, that continue to grow at an alarming rate, such as, for instance, the explosive growth of space debris. How difficult it is to really proceed on this way shows the fate of two recent efforts in that direction. One is the virtual failure of an attempt by the European Union to launch a comprehensive topical code of conduct for space activities by states. And another ones are negotiations led by the United Nations to create rules for the long-term sustainability of space activities. And I have great admiration for Peter Martinez to trying so hard to proceed on this rather difficult way. This, of course, raises the question of the methods by which further progress could be achieved. Here, the further question could be raised whether instead of a top-down approach that tries to incorporate all or many aspects of space governance into one set of rules, one could not proceed with a bottom-up approach that would create rules for specific fields, such as, for instance, space traffic management, an issue that has been mentioned before by Kai-Uwe Schogel. Space traffic management, large as that field may be, or protection of space systems, like communication satellites against attack. Such a report might perhaps meet the concern of those who are reluctant to agree to an overall system of space governments for various reasons, such as a general dislike for any form of international authority. But who could still be willing to accept certain rules of the road in the interest of their own security? Whether in the end such sectoral agreements could grow into something larger and more comprehensive, or whether at the end on the road an old dream like a World Space Organization would emerge, remains an open question. Still, such an report seems worth a try and would be far better than a situation full of incalculable risks that we face today. Let us hope, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that Unispace Plus 50 will be a departure into one of these directions, and that space security, space safety will be increased through these massive international efforts, which, however, I think however, I think it is still time for the political world to get a little bit more anxious, a little bit more active in the matter of space governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been informed that we don't have so much time. I negotiated at least one question among the ones that have been collected. So, and this is for any one of the panelists. The question is, how do you feel about the new space legislations of USA and Luxembourg? Do those pose threat to the beneficial to all mankind goal of the Outer Space Treaty? Who wants to take it?
That's for the International Institute of Space.
Absolutely.
Thank you. The International Institute of Space Law has made a number of analyses on that, and you will not be surprised to hear that there are different interpretations of that. We are not coming up with the one interpretation, and I'm not here to provide you the one interpretation, but I can tell you that we maneuver in between the area of advocates of property rights, also advocates of appropriation, and advocates of keeping up Article 2 and the wording of Article 2 that there is no national appropriation of outer space. This, of course, has severe consequences, and since we do not have the one authoritative interpretation, we can only hope that, and I stress that, the principles of the Outer Space Treaty, the principles of the Outer Space Treaty together, which are also international cooperation, space activities in the interest and for the benefits of all countries, are maintained and are taken into consideration in whichever activities the countries are undertaking in outer space.
So thank you very much. We have to close here this very interesting debate. I'm sorry, time is running, but I would like, before closing, I would like to thank again Kai-Uwe Schroegel, the president of the International Institute of Space Law, for having co-organized with us this important event. I would like to thank again Peter Martinez, the chair of the working group on the long-term sustainability of other space activities, and also professor Space Lab at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. And again, last but not least, Petar Jankovic, the president of International Academy of Astronautics, and a good advocate always of the activities of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and also a great supporter of the Office for Outer Space Affairs. So thank you very much, and I hope that this discussion can continue in other fora because this is really important for the future of space activities. Thank you very much.